Welcome to the podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Rachel Goldlust. Rachel is a researcher, educator, and a consultant at Renew, a national non-profit dedicated to sustainable housing. Rachel's not your typical academic. She's a hands-on expert who spent a decade leading Earthship Australia and helping people become more self-sufficient through eco-friendly building practices. Currently, she's with Natural Building Australia, connecting and showcasing builders using natural materials. What sets Rachel apart is her unique academic and lived experience. She recently completed her PhD, exploring why Australians are drawn to off-grid and back-to-the-land lifestyles. Her research may soon become a fascinating book. If you're curious about alternative living, natural building, or renewable energy politics, stay tuned for an enlightening conversation with Dr. Rachel Goldlust.
Hey guys, welcome to today's podcast. And today we have the privilege of actually talking to Dr. Rachel Goldlust. So Rach, tell us a bit about your journey in getting into off-grid, because it's pretty unique and I don't think there's not many people that have had the opportunity to do what you've done. So tell us a bit about your story.
Thanks, Mike. And it's lovely to join you finally on your podcast. Well, my story, I've been telling my story for quite a number of years now, because for a while I was doing a lot of public-facing talks when I got into Earthship. So that was probably the first access that I had to kind of off-grid living and off-grid world. And that was around 2009. And I had been doing a planning degree, and I had been interested in the idea that we could build better communities and better housing, but I wasn't hugely motivated by the system as it stood. And it was around that time that the Earthship documentary came out, Garbage Warrior, which made a bit of inroads into people who were trying to think a bit differently about housing, particularly, and sustainability and renewable energy. And there was a bit of a move, and a lot of people jumped on board, and I found myself joining together with a mob of people based out of Ceres Environment Park in Melbourne who were interested in this Earthship thing. How can we get one? How could we build one? How could we do the off-grid thing? Can we do it in the city, etc.? And
So,
go.
For those who don't know what an Earthship is, do you want to give a quick introduction of what an Earthship actually is?
So an Earthship is promoted as an autonomous building. So the idea behind an Earthship is that it has 5 principles. So A, it uses recycled materials. B, it uses as much renewable or off-grid systems as it can. And that includes water recycling, that includes energy, that includes as much food that you can kind of grow yourself within the structure. And then it's recycled materials. And then they're also sort of primed to be, self-regulating, so insulative in the way that they operate, so that you don't need a whole amount of external energy. Even though you do provide your own energy from solar, you don't need to use that energy to heat and cool, so that they're thermally efficient. They were created out of the high deserts in New Mexico, so they have a particularly extreme, they're meant to be classed as sort of extreme variance for temperature, so that they can operate at minus 20 degrees right up until 35, 40 degrees, and that they will maintain a stable temperature year round that sits somewhere between 16 and 21. So these pull together a whole lot of passive solar design principles that are already in existence that aren't exclusive to Earthships, but that it was the way they were sort of packaged up and branded as this kind of autonomous house, the ship being the idea that it's a solo on the sea. It took me a while to get my head around. That's why it's called an Earthship. It's on Earth, but it's independent in that it can operate independently without external systems. So that was my kind of initial foray, and I called it the gateway idea, for a stepping stone for a lot of us who came up around the same time, who had vague interests in design, architecture, green building, housing, and energy self-sufficiency. And it kind of packaged it all up and combined it in a way that we could grab onto. And I think that's why, especially for someone like me, I didn't come from that background. I came from a history background, and I had started to do planning because I thought it'd be good to get a job at some point. and history doesn't give you too many options to get employed. So planning seemed like a practical thing that I could do. And I really enjoyed planning. I really enjoyed the idea of thinking a bit bigger around communities and development and housing and how we can plan better and how we could build better. But green building is such a small, and it still is a very small part of the planning mechanism and the way we look at housing. We can't even do developments right where we orientate the houses in north facing. Like, we still can't do that.
Yep. Yeah, well, I've been heavily involved the last 2 years in, I've done a couple of property development courses, and it's for me, I want to solve the biggest problem I can, with my skills and knowledge. And I thought buildings is one of those things I'm really passionate about, because designing off-grid solar, I've been really lucky is I'm involved the whole build. So people call me, they got a block of land and say, hey, Mike, I want to go off-grid. And normally most of the time people contact me is because they want to see how much it's going to cost to power the block of land first and go through that process. But I've been really lucky because I've been to influence people's decisions on designing their house and making it really energy efficient. So, the solar system looks amazing, but it's really that we've done that groundwork and making the house really energy efficient. So, but yeah, with the development of property developers, it's all about their design is how many keys, that's the insider terms. So how many keys can we fit on this development? And that's what it's all about, is about fitting more properties on more keys so they can make more profit. Because the whole intention when you work with property developers is get many houses, because it reduces the land costs, which makes you more profit. So yeah, so it's definitely the model's broken. So
it's super broken and so distressing, considering this week in Victoria, especially, Dan Andrews has just opened the floodgates to unpermitted dwellings because he's trying to solve the housing crisis, and he's trying to figure out ways to speed up the process, because they're saying that local government is the barrier, which, as someone who's worked for local government, I find that really difficult to swallow. They're a barrier because they're trying to maintain environmental standards as one of the reasons why there's problems with development, because, a lot of things don't tick the environmental criteria. Yeah. So if you're going to open up the floodgates, which is what he's planning to do, we're just going to get a whole lot more insubstantial housing, and housing that doesn't operate in a way that provides people with comfort and security to be able to manage fluctuations in climate, and to be able to manage, extreme events like floods and fires and all of those things. So it's great in one way because we need to solve the housing crisis, but it's also kind of distressing from a planning perspective to see less controls, especially when it comes to environmental considerations about how do these houses operate. And you can't just keep building substandard housing that's going to cost people more money, and it's going to be, intolerable to live in if you don't have good design.
Yeah. No, totally. I think, it's one of those things for me that I call it my caravan park. We've talked about this a few times before, but on the podcast, my intention, I want to build a caravan park that literally has, a row of straw bale houses, a row of Earthships. I don't think you ever consider
tiny houses. The tiny house caravan park dream. Yep.
Well, it's more about hemp houses, mud brick, straw bale. So it's more about having all those different types of houses in one situation where people can come and experience, because people don't really realize how healthy and how a house just should really work for you. Like the house brand at the moment, we went more of a traditional build. It's not a long-term house. We actually we did strip all the internal walls off, and we were going to hemp it. And we had issues with the guys doing the hemp, and it broke a dream. I was like, get my hemp house, and not this time. But yeah, we went magnesium oxide board, and it was just the maintenance and managing a house. I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to live in a natural building. Rammed Earth is another one. So that was my thing with the caravan park, is to build these places where people can come on holiday and literally do them all over Australia and make them fun, have the water parks and that sort of stuff for the kids, and make them more self-sufficient. But people could really come and experience what it's like to live in a natural home. And ideally that takes them back home and go, well, I'm living in a straw bale house, I'm going to do rammed earth or whatever. So Yeah,
There are ways, there are people who are already putting their, like our friend Martin Freeney's house in Ironbank in South Australia is an Airbnb. You can go and stay in it. There would probably be an equivalent version of that already in existence around the country if you put those
yeah,
criterias into Airbnb, for example. But yes, I love that idea. I also love the idea because it immediately made me think of, imagine all of the trades that you're going to encourage by building all of these caravan parks, because we need more people to be building these houses, and we need it to be more economically viable for them to be able to continue to work in what is still a very niche industry, and to be able to support themselves in a, like, to know that they've got jobs coming up and that they've
yeah,
got work and that they can train apprentices and all of the things that's very hard to do when you're just holding on and you're just
yeah,
trying to hold on to, that's been my observation of the natural building industry in Australia, is that it was growing and flourishing, and then in the 90s, when the building code came down on top of it, it really killed a lot of industry because it wouldn't recognize the R value of non-conventional prefabricated materials. It wouldn't recognize passive solar design as giving, equatable insulative properties for houses that didn't operate in the same way as conventional builds. And it really did decimate the industry in the
yeah.
90s. That's been
No,
what I've
totally.
been hearing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard. Like, that's the biggest challenge I've had. Like, I will, I'm sort of person who wants something done. I'll just, get it done. And it's the biggest challenge we've had with tradies is doing different things. And they're like, oh, it's different. We're not normally used to doing it, and finding people that work with this stuff. And, we did our first house in 2012. That was even just the solar and batteries back then was a huge challenge. Where now, like, solar and batteries is easy these days. There's a million guys out there doing it. But the natural building and making the house energy efficient, that's a real challenge to find enough people. And the good guys are flat out and booked out for years. And yeah, so it is that balance.
And the
So
price differential is one that's going to make a huge impact on it, on
yeah,
people's choices, because they look at the price and go,
yeah,
oh, that's outrageous. Like, I can't afford that. I don't want a mortgage that big. Or, so you make compromises. But if you don't see like, I'm doing this in my other work at the moment, trying to get people off gas, and look at the way that you should see electrification as an investment, not necessarily a sacrifice, because the electric appliances cost more, but
yeah,
you will pay for them over the life of that
yeah,
appliance, and you will come out on top. But it's really
yeah,
hard to do the same equation for a natural house when you say you will never pay for an electricity bill
yeah,
again,
yeah,
because your house will be thermally efficient. Like, can you add up all of that money that like, no one's really doing a lot of those numbers, especially in the different
no,
climates and the different
yeah,
situations around Australia, and go, if you make your house thermally efficient from the get-go and you don't have to worry about heating and cooling it, how much money are you going to save? And how does that
totally.
compare with the outlay, which could be 200 to 300 grand more
Yeah,
than a conventional house, or
yeah,
a prefabricated house anyway, with heating and cooling?
yeah. And that's it. And then the more people we get building or working with this stuff, it's going to bring the prices down. And yeah, then that's the real challenge, is just, it's the chicken or the egg scenario. But yeah, people don't realize how, like, my wife had a whinge to me a few weeks ago. It was probably a couple of months ago now, that we had $100 energy bill. And I was like, babe, we don't have a 60 kilowatt solar system like we used to when we had work. We used to charge all the cars at work, like,
Yeah.
and that's literally our fuel bill as well. So,
Yeah.
for 3 months we had $100 bill for our electricity and our car running costs. So,
Yeah. It's nothing.
it
It's
is.
absolutely nothing.
I know, and yeah, people don't realize that all that amount of money. We drove to Sydney and back the other day, and we worked out in our electric car that we'd saved almost $16,000 in 100,000 Ks. What we would have saved if we would have been buying petrol. And then that's if we had to pay full price for the energy. And I've never worked out, like, most of that car, most of the time it's done is local kilometers, which is all free for us. We only ever pay when we're traveling on the roads.
Yeah.
So yeah, and people don't realize that investment. And I suppose one of the things as well is, I remember doing a talk when it comes to investment, and people get so caught up with energy and an investment. And the one thing I used to always bring up to people is like, okay, when you go buy a new car, what you consider of an investment there? A new car straight away, you drop 10 grand the minute you drive it off the property lot. But people don't seem to have that connection with the car. It's like, oh, it's just a cost of life, where I think if a lot more people took that approach to the energy systems and being self-efficient, people would have a different outlook, because people don't care about an investment on a car, but they have that same sort of perception when it comes to energy and renewables and that investment, and especially in a house that, like for me, my whole thing with a house is the house should work for me. I'm not working for it. A traditional house build is you're working for it to keep it maintained, looked after, and make it so that when you're ready to sell it, you get some of your money back. That's how I think about it, where the houses I've designed myself, they work for me. They're renewable. They create water. They create all this stuff for me and a family. And that's my intention when I design and build houses, is that, they're working for me. I'm not working for them.
I mean, you must have come across the slogan of a passive house needs active people.
Yeah.
Like it's a pretty, fundamental switch that starts with, if you're going to run your life off solar and batteries, you need to manage those, and you need to be actively involved in, not killing your batteries and not, keeping them charged and, maintaining it like you would a car, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it's like to think about your home as another operating system that you need to actually maintain some awareness of. But for, generations, we've been subcontracting all of those things to other people. And, professionals, the other people, much like house building. That's part of my mission, is also to give people the confidence that they can tackle something as big as a house, and that we used to do that, and that was how houses got built. Not 2 generations ago, we were building our own houses or building houses for each other with no more or less skills or understanding or competency than we have today.
Yeah.
But it's the confidence. It's the idea that we've professionalized the industry to a point where we don't feel confident to be able to make decisions around something as simple as housing, shelter. When we make decisions about, like you make decisions about power, and you go, all right, this is your power system. Here's how you deal with it. Here's how you manage it. Here's how you operate it. I think there's a whole lot of things that we've, subcontracted away.
Yeah. And I think with the natural build, this is one thing that I've experienced. Like every natural build I've been involved in, like, you might meet 10 to 40 people on a build, and pretty much at the end of it, nearly every single person we've hugged, we've spent relationship, and I've kept in touch with. I remember my first natural build was actually we built a mud brick wall. We did some the bottles and stuff in the wall, and I reckon like there's about 20 people at the workshop, and I reckon there's probably 3 or 4 that actually don't keep in contact with. And I think most natural builds I've ever been involved in, or people that build a natural build, they have this real community. Everyone loves the build at the end, and everyone keeps in touch. It just builds this connection, where most traditional house builds these days, you hate the builder at the end of it. You want to sue them. They didn't do it properly. It's not a good, the handover is not a good experience.
And they don't want you anywhere near it for as long as possible either, because you're just a pain in the ass, according to them, because you're stopping them from doing what they want to do. I mean, this is what fundamentally got me back into studying after I'd been doing workshops for 5 or 6 years, helping to do Earthship stuff mostly, and then other natural builds as well. And what I had noticed was that on all of those projects, there was this growing urge or desire to be more hands-on and to be more engaged with the fundamentals of shelter. And that's what led me back to do my PhD, because I thought, hang on, surely we're not the first generation to have this feeling. Like, this feeling is something that is essential or critical to us being human, and feeling that we have control over our environment in, really unsteady times. And as someone who'd done a history degree previously, I decided to look back historically at that off-grid idea. So what was it about this particular moment? So this was just post 2008 GFC. And that was the moment that I was doing a lot of my building stuff in and seeing all these people. So it was about this kind of external existential fear that was happening around, particularly then, around housing and mortgage stress, and, not feeling like you could trust the economic system to be able to look after you, because it was in so much flux. And so I went, all right, this can't be unique. Surely there's been periods in history when we've looked at these similar situations and had similar impulses. And that's what led me to go back to school and, get out of the physically building bricks game for a little while and start to sort of dig a bit deeper into some of the ideas, because same, I'd seen so many people at all of these workshops who are craving something, community, practical skills, just doing something different with your time, like with the way you spend your holidays or your weeks. People bringing children, grandparents, people coming after like major life crises. That was another observation that I made. There was often people there who'd had a breakup or separation, or had lost access to their kids, or something really significant had happened to them, and they'd found themselves on a natural build, which was kind of sometimes a bit challenging because he had a lot of people's different emotions to deal with. But often it was just about get into work, like get physical and get into work, and you can try and soothe some of those deep pains that you're going through, and find people who are prepared to listen, which you would, and you'd listen to people's stories, and you'd hear about their issues, and you try and give them something practical to work through. Like, all right, here's a giant pit that needs to be dug out. here's your afternoon. I'll come back in a little while and we can have another chat. And they just go, because it's just something really practical and meaningful that gets you out of your head for a little while.
Totally. Yep. Yeah.
Natural building as life therapy. I should start another course on that.
It's so true. Like, well, there's some studies done that, say like playing in the soil can cure depression. So, this was probably a conversation for another time. So, mate, just talking that. So, tell us more about. So, how did we become Dr. Rachel? Where did this,
Yeah, I mean, when you say you're a doctor of off-grid, people make all sorts of assumptions about the fact that you know something about kilowatt hours, which I don't, which has been my, as you would know, because we've been on panels together, that is my Achilles, is I'm not a numbers person. So I am a social scientist. I come from that background of trying to understand behaviors and people and what motivates people. And that was my thesis. So I did a history of off-grid living in Australia from the 1890s until 2016. Very long time span all across the country. And what I wanted to do was to sort of find patterns and find repeated times when people were doing ostensibly the same thing, like the same activity. So my criteria was, everyone, when you say, the history of off-grid, they go, everyone was off-grid before the 1950s because there was no grid, which is true. But I was looking for people who were sort of making a deliberate move. So they were deciding that whatever they had, which was usually from urban to rural, so they were deciding that whatever they had in their previous life wasn't satisfying, or it didn't complete them in the way that they wanted to be completed, or they weren't free or independent enough to be able to live the life that they wanted to. So I discovered that there was, for women especially, there was a real yearning to escape the cities at different points in history because, surprise, surprise, they weren't free to be able to live the life that they wanted to live in the way that they wanted to live, because there were expectations that they had to get married and be a domestic servant to their husband, and they couldn't have a job, and they couldn't have independent activities or hobbies, and they couldn't earn their own money. A lot of things that women have not been able to do over the years, they could do in a self-sufficiency framework because they had to. Because if you move rural and you have to feed yourself, you have to plant the things, and also no one's watching. There's less people, there's less scrutiny on you. So for women who, let's say, wanted to be with other women, it was an opportunity that they could do that away from prying eyes in the city. So that was a thing that I discovered that I wouldn't have even imagined was a thing that people would go.
Didn't think about that.
People would go back to the land, because that was the language before off-grid, because off-grid's only a term that's come up since the 1980s, really. But before off-grid, it was a back to the land idea. So the idea was that you were re-engaging with self-sufficiency, and that was practical and fundamental self-sufficiency, so feeding yourself and providing your own water. But actually, it was more than that. It was also like an ideology. So something that you would do because you didn't like the system in some ways. Often it was ideological, political, and then also it became environmental. Down the line, it became environmental. So there was no concept of ecological self-sufficiency in the 1930s and 40s, but by the 60s and 70s, obviously that became a motivation where people went, right, peak oil is happening and nuclear armament is happening, and we don't agree with any of that, and so we're going to go back to the land, which is obviously the Nimbin and the Kuranda and the 1970s hippies were all coming out of that particular motivation. But
Yep.
my aim was to just trace it. So trace it from as far back as I could go, which was the 1890s. And I found people who were doing exactly the same thing that we're doing today in the 1890s for very similar reasons, which is basically like, don't really like the system, don't really like the economic system, would rather be able to manage the ups and downs of the broader economic system, so depressions or, inflation, by being more self-sufficient. And that, does come down to housing and food. Energy obviously came much later in the time when, energy considerations were something that we could, because solar panels allowed you to be able to be independent from the grid because the technology emerged. Yeah.
No, totally. So with over the years was there some sort of theme that you saw with, like, because I'm on this mission at the moment to build communities. I think I see a lot of mistakes on, a lot of Facebook groups and stuff I'm involved in. I see a lot of people that I know their intentions are good, but they're sharing only their own experiences, and certain things that don't work for different groups and different areas and microclimates and things like that. But I see there's like everyone goes, not everyone, but there's a lot of people these days that turn to Facebook and ask a question just for a bunch of randoms on the internet, and then make the decisions from that there, which may not be the best decision for them. So I'm on this mission to design and build turnkey, we call them off-grid communities based, I'll make self-sufficient communities. And I felt with the off-grid in the States, I get hammered from people in the States because I'm a big believer of, like, if the grid's there, use it, because we can share our excess with the community. And to me, it's about solving a bigger problem than just, being off-grid and getting away from everything. It's about, well, how do we solve everyone's problems together as a team, because we're all in this boat together. So mate, what's some successful things or some unsuccessful things you've seen with communities either work really well or they don't, like from your study? Is there anything you can define from what's made a community really successful, or certain things that haven't?
I mean, like, I was very aware of, in my studies, to not be defined by whether or not people were in community or whether or not they were independent, because I'm not saying that your dream isn't probably more realistic than a lot of other people who believe that they can go it alone, and they like the idea of that rugged individualism of being able to really survive against all odds. And that's a whole subsection of off-grid people and identity and politics that is there, that exists. But when you tell people, like when I was telling people what I was studying, off-grid communities became the default. And I sort of became really aware of that, because I went, but not everyone does it in community. And particularly because of that North American kind of really strident individualism that doesn't speak so much about communities. But the Australian story is much more communal because of, I guess, just the hostility of the landscape and the inability and the distances and the inability for people really to do that kind of thing by themselves. So yes, communalism and community living has been a strong factor in the success and the failures of different eras or generations of people that have sought to be self-sufficient. And most of the early case studies that I found were definitely communal. What helped them survive? I mean, there's probably a lot there. I am a bit of a fan of personally benevolent dictatorships, because I believe that full communal, I don't know, you get bogged down, I think, in the decision making around whatever. I've forgotten the term of it, when everyone, equal, when everyone has equal rights to decision making. I think things can just get stuck where they are. And so I think there needs to be strong leadership in a lot of ways. So yes, the places that kind of go somewhere tend to be people with really charismatic leadership, and for good and for bad, because some of those leaders don't necessarily have the best intentions in mind, but they do tend to last longer because people are happy to be led at the end of the day, and they are happy to give back some of the decision-making responsibility to, which is why companies and businesses run with boards. Like, there's a reason for that kind of like operating, because actually you do need an executive function. So I think, from my observations of different eras, obviously will have different impacts and different pressures and different things. It also depends on where they are. I've noticed of recent generations that a lot of the communities that have been trying to get started have struggled because of, it's kind of like an all-in, like you do need to have an all-in commitment, because once you start to work away, particularly this is before a lot of us started working from home on a regular basis, but as soon as you start to work away and your attention gets drawn out and you get drawn out back to the city or back to the community, it means you're sort of less invested in the general goings on of what happens in the community. So I think distance, like physical distance, would have a big impact on the capacity of the community to be able to manage its own affairs, deal with the problems or deal with the finances that it needs, which is why, like, I've lived on kibbutz, you know, and kibbutzes are great examples of that because they're often very isolated, physically isolated. So you know, they're little oases in the desert, for example, where everything, all the work happens on the site. All of the investment is internal. The education is internal. You know, people leave to go and, you know, go to school, let's say, on another place or something. But I think when you have a lot of that in focus internal, it does keep the momentum going. Whereas as soon as you start to have all of that external, like, you know, I'm going to go to yoga over there, or I'm going to go out and do that over there, then you start to kind of lose a bit of the investment in the community itself, I think. And I mean, it's really hard because not everyone has the funds to be able to, you know, work from home, like, or capacity to work from home, or the funds to be able to just invest themselves completely in where they're at. So there's going to be that draw, that push or pull between the community and the outside world, and then what the needs are. So I guess on that sense, it just comes down to commitment. It just comes down to how much time are you committed to this, and these are the rules of engagement. You know, we meet once a month, and we have a working bee day, and we work on Mike's house, and then we'll go and work on Sarah's house, and then we'll go and do over there, and just like have those rules of this is how this community works. Set up from the get-go, so that everyone knows their obligations and their buy-in, I guess, about what they're buying into, because people's lives change, needs change, children, you know, parents, like, it's such a hard thing to be able to predict. And so there has to be I think there has to be some kind of baseline, like some structure to fall back on.
I'm involved in quite a few communities, and, you know, from the power point of view, we designed the whole power stations for the whole communities, and it's funny, I feel like everyone tells me everything, you know, so I get to, because I go from one house to another and I hear the gossip and the stories and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite funny.
You need those kind of people, though. You need the village gossip. Every community needs a village gossip.
No, totally. So so with, you know, I suppose with a lot of the stuff I can see, definitely with the reasons it's true and why communities work and why they don't work. So one of the things I see a lot of these days, and you know, I think, how do we design, like, I look at off-grid, the way I sort of think about it, that people that are going off-grid, by default, they're doing awesome. So if they're going to go be self-sufficient, then like, great. I think probably the biggest people that I would like to educate and encourage to be more self-sufficient is communities. And I think the way our communities, I suppose what we were talking about before about property developers and the way they're developed, is our neighborhoods and communities these days are developed that people have no interaction. I think it's a really big thing missed in development of a community. So how do you think that maybe a more traditional developer or in urban environments, because that's what I'm really passionate about, is look, both my houses have been off-grid self-sufficient in the middle of cities. And that's what I'd really like to encourage more people to do that there. So how do you think we could design our cities better to have that more community interaction and this success in a city without going out bush and doing all this?
I mean, there's a few examples that come to mind, and I was recently on a panel with a person from one of the local governments in Melbourne who work really hard on community batteries. And I find that kind of quite interesting because it's kind of a new technology for me anyway. I don't really understand how they work, but I think the process of, like, just looking at the project of getting a community battery together, like what that looks like and what's involved and who's involved and who has to have buy-in and how does it develop and where do you get the funds from. So I think the The process of getting a community battery is as much part of the positive outcomes of having the community battery is getting people to see it and go, what is that? Like, why would we want to do that? But then being involved in the process of getting one to then have that be a point of community building, really, because it is giving people an opportunity to get involved in something that is not just going to benefit your household. You know, there's obviously more broader benefits of having it. I mean, I don't understand the energy market enough to understand what they do in the big picture of community of energy supplying. But I kind of like the ones that I've seen pictures of are like painted up really boldly, like they get local artists to paint them and they become a kind of source of pride. So if you think about structurally from a historical perspective around town planning, how did we used to build our towns? We always had a town square. You know, we always had a city square because that was where the commerce happened and that's where the exchange happened and that's where, you know, meetings would happen and sharing information. And, you know, if you think about what's wrong with large scale peri-urban development is there's satellites. You know, the idea is they're all just satellite suburbs that feed into the city and that they're, you know, some good ones will have communal areas built and you know, all this stuff around having communal spaces and having parklands and having all those places where people can actually gather and meet. But then you see those photos of those like horrific ones that are just wall to wall fences and roofs and fences and roofs and no yard and no space. And you go, that's alienating. It's so alienating and isolating. And you know, people have to live somewhere, so you're gonna live there if you can afford it. But what are we doing to that idea of providing some kind of networked space or interactive space, which is what, you know, town planners have been banging on about for quite some time. But you know, our planning scheme still lets them do that, and they still let them just build in a paddock without providing any central point of connection. So I guess same thing would happen in the city, and that's why people like Michael Mobbs in Sydney, who is a bit of a old school stalwart of showing what is possible in terms of doing his off-grid house in the middle of downtown Sydney, but he's moved into these kind of rain gardens and benches in the streets, and he's really into activating his community. That's become his next, which I find, if you take that as a metaphor, a really interesting trajectory, where he started in the 90s. How do I turn my suburban house off grid? And then invite everyone in to demonstrate that it's possible, that you can have Blackwater and you can have a full solar kit and you can have a fully sort of semi-sufficient house in the middle of Sydney. But then he's moved on. He's moved to the next step, which is basically like, how do I activate my community and how do I create projects? So they're all kind of, they're like worm farm the ones I've seen is like worm farm park benches where you can, they're all in one jobbies, and he's getting like, but people are coming from America, like college students who want to learn about like community activation, and, you know, they're just worm farms that are like bench seats that have stuff growing out of them. But it's the project that's the critical bit, is he's creating these opportunities for people to interact and, you know, meet their neighbours and create space. And this is like very dense part of the world where there's not a whole lot of parks, there's not a whole lot of, you know, open space.
Yeah. You know, I think it comes back to what we talked about before about a natural build, where, you know, people pay to go build someone's house, a natural build, and you spend all those weeks together and you really bond. And I think that's what it comes down to, is that the community battery idea is, it's getting people together to do something together. And I think, you know, you're right when it comes back to, I think a lot of people these days have just put up to the professionals, let them do it all. And it takes away that community build and that decision making, which, you know, whether you like it or not, you know, the decision goes your way or not. But I think it's just that process of being together and doing something together. It brings people together. Definitely. So,
yeah.
You know,
And the fact that, like, you know, when you would have started and when I first started looking into, you know, particularly batteries and off grid, there definitely was this idea about it being about me. You know, it was about my autonomy, my independence, the things that I need to get me safe and secure. But I feel like even in that 15 years or whatever, it's definitely shifted into a more communal idea about, you know, community resilience And what does that look like? Because even though Mike Reynolds might not see himself as being an avid socialist, this is the founder of Earthships, what he did was build a community. He built a community around an idea that was about reciprocated labor, and it was about, getting everyone into shelter and getting everyone into good shelter and getting everyone into a place that, could provide for them into the future. And, it has allowed us to build community even here in Australia. Like we started Earthship Australia out of a, vague idea that there was something in that we could apply here to the Australian situation. And I still remember going to the first, as I was still a town planner, I hadn't finished yet, and I was going to a post bushfire recovery planning session. It was just after the Black Saturday bushfires, and that's where I met a whole bunch of people who I'm still networked with through the Earthship world, who were all looking to Mike Reynolds, who was brought out to talk about Earthship as the ultimate of bushfire. Like they could operate really well in a bushfire zone because they were buried, because you only had some of the surface that could be lost, and you could rebuild more easily than if you lost your whole house. And so he was making a really bold claim that everyone who lived in Kinglake or that part of the world should rebuild Earthships, and that there should be Earthships everywhere. And there is one now. But there was these people standing up in the crowd who were asking questions about him, going, I'm interested in this, how do I get my council to listen to me, to be able to get one of these through my council? And that's where that was my light globe moment, where I'm sitting there going, I'm just about to finish my planning degree. I've got these skills that I could possibly apply to help people to get these things into their community. But it was still very much seen as an individual aspiration, something that you just wanted to do because you wanted one. Whereas now I think growing the movement as I have, and growing the connections and the network, and also because I'm not an Earthship devotee anymore, let's just say, I've broadened my horizons much further and gatewayed into all the other natural building styles that I really love just as much, for all of their pros and cons and different climates and different applications. But seeing that it's the movement that's far more kind of important than just getting people into individual houses, because it's a lot of energy when it's hand labor. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of energy goes into building these things, and and they're great, but you really do have to look at, like what is going to be sustainable. Like your vision, I love it, but that's a lot of hand hours to build all of those homes. And there's got to be support. There's got to be an industry behind it that supports it to the point where you're going, you can get X amount of PD credit hours for this, like incentives to get people to do it, not just because they want to, because a lot of us don't have a whole lot of spare cash or time anymore. That's getting harder and harder to find. So there's got to be these kind of drivers in terms of institutional, like the TAFEs need to get behind it, or the big business that actually has lots of money that could get behind these kind of projects and support them, because they're allowing people to get skills and to, build up their community resilience, so that when another Lismore happens, when a whole lot of housing gets lost, that we're not all just siphoned to these 5 builders that can help us rebuild our homes again, those kind of moments.
And look, the sad thing with Lismore, and I've had a couple of my customers approach me, and there's been some rallies and stuff in town. They've asked me to come and talk to council and do some stuff, and all the councillors have said, don't even waste your time, because it's about money. And that's I have this opinion of Lismore. Children. Yes, I have this opinion of I have this opinion of Lismore being this really self-sufficient, sustainable place. And since I've lived here and watched what goes on, it is literally, especially with the floods, it's just we'll just build new houses and it'll be fine for another 10 years, and just all that waste and landfill, and it's all about numbers and about money, and that's a really sad thing. I thought with Lismore we had a really good opportunity to start from scratch again and build some really cool houses, some really cool developments. But the hard thing is no one wants to bulldoze everything down and start again, or move
or
everyone
move it. Yeah.
So it's a real challenge with getting all this stuff to happen and to people to change. Really, that's one of the biggest problems, and especially here in Lismore, like one of the biggest problems I see is the probably the best thing for Lismore Council is to lose a lot of ratepayers and move them to other councils, because there's better land there, but Lismore Council don't want to lose the ratepayers, and so the people making the decisions are making their decision around money, because it's like, well, if we lose those 1,000 ratepayers, there's a couple of $100 million a year gone, done and dusted. So we don't want them to go to Alstonville, but Alstonville's up on the hill, all the flat land, it's all safe. And literally, there's a couple of 100 meters between, good land and what council's trying to max out here in Lismore at the moment, which, it all comes down to we're going to lose all those ratepayers, is what it comes down to. Like, I even thought the other day, I was like, what if Lismore Council pitched Alstonville to buy that block of land,
It's so disheartening when, I have a good friend from my natural building world who lives in South Coast New South Wales that got burnt out 2019, and she's a natural builder, a very successful natural builder, and she wanted to get a piece of that emergency funding money that came out after those fires. And she pitched a project for 12 months where basically she could teach natural building skills to her community, and bring a whole bunch of us along so that we could also teach into different aspects of, but also just to empower her community. She was asking for not a whole lot in the big scheme of that massive amount of of funding that went in. She was really just asking for herself for a wage and a bit more to be able to pay some people to teach natural building skills, and she didn't get it. We all wrote letters of support, we all wrote character references, but because we're too kind of far outside the system, I guess. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. Of course it's a great idea. You've got this town that's been completely burnt down, and people are going to be living in sheds and caravans and all those things for ages. They've got land. How about you start them on the owner builder journey so that they can start to, put structures up and do it themselves and not wait for all of the supposed funding or the lack of, we're always going to have a lack of trades in this country, really, when you need them, you can't find them. So like the idea that government wouldn't, give her the cash to be able to empower her community was so disheartening at the end of the day.
It's like at the moment we've got a grant writer that works for us, like full time. Basically, her job is to try and help us find grants and that sort of stuff as a business. And one of the big things right now I'm trying to work on, and the biggest problem is that we're a solar renewable energy business, and so we can apply for grants when it comes to solar and batteries and things like that. And I'm like, well, the best solution is to make houses energy efficient, but they don't want to do that because there's less solar, less batteries to go up. So it's really hard, from trying to get grants written to make it fit our business. Like, we've never, ever been successful with a grant, because our intention is, and I always say to people, the best money you will spend is making your home energy efficient. It doesn't need heating or cooling, because then everything else becomes really, really easy. And I suppose that's the biggest challenge we find, is we know that more solars and more battery and that sort of stuff's really not the solution. It's making the houses more energy efficient, but the people that are handing out the money want us to put more solar, more batteries up. So it's a challenge, it's it's a huge challenge. And it also comes back down to, we did a project, we just consulted on it. The project never went ahead. We just run the numbers, and what we did, we run the numbers on that. If it was a traditional build, there was 8 houses in a row, they would have made a certain amount of money. If we did 6 houses and, we shared electricity connection, a water connection, we harvest our own water, had our own community battery, because it's another thing as well. When you do things on scale, it's cheaper, more cost effective. So all those sort of things that we did, and we worked out that the extra money they would spend and only putting 6 houses on there, the developers could charge enough to cover for the 2 houses that they lost on the development, and the owners would actually make their money back, the extra money they spent in 7 years, from an investment point of view. So it's doable. You can make it happen, and the challenge is they go, well, it's all hard work, and then we need to find a certain type of buyer that want to be involved in this sort of stuff. It's complicated. We'll just put 8 houses up because we make our money. We know this works, and I suppose it's that system. We know this system works. We know this makes us money. We'll just keep doing that until it doesn't make money anymore. So
and I mean, those kind of things would need to be driven from the inside, which makes me think you really do have to have people like you at the project management level of those sort of projects, because they, to make that argument, you've made that. I would love to see those figures, and I think that's a really interesting kind of data point that you've made, because you go, look, we've done the numbers here. Like, this is going to make financial sense, and it is going to make environmental sense at the end. And the market is there. Everyone knows that the market is there because, in Victoria we have the Nightingale Group, and they build these sustainable units and they get bought up for years and years in advance. People want what those particular kind of developments are offering, and they're prepared to pay the price point to have those kind of shared resources, shared benefits, sustainable housing, all of those things. Like, you're right, it is just kind of laziness, because it's like, this makes us money, we don't need to change it.
That's it. I was working with a property developer for a bit, and he used to run these seminars, and up front he talked a really good game of being sustainable and wanting to make more and care about the environment and all his daughter and that sort of stuff. And then behind the scenes, when we were talking about doing things, it was just like, nah, it costs us money. It's all about just profits. And that's the challenge, and it's even like the new rules that are coming in. I know in Victoria of how aware you are these, but in October, which is only a few days away from before we're shooting this, is this new basic standards or new environmental standards. I think, like in New South Wales, an example, they have to use double glazing moving forward. Are you aware of the new law changes when it comes to building? And
I didn't realise they were coming in so soon.
Yeah, so I think in New South Wales here, it's in Queensland, it's October. So
wow.
New changes. So a lot of developers that I'm working with at the moment are just not building anything because they're just like, right, we need to find out and understand these new rules and regulations and what we can and can't do. And
so that's just within the basic standards.
Yeah, so it's the way I sort of like to explain it to people is just like the energy efficient star ratings.
Yeah.
It was a 7-star house last year. That same 7-star house this year is going to be a 5-star house. And that's what they're more moving towards, an increase in the standards of what's doable. And I think they're so far away from, and look, that's only really going to help natural building costs, because the reality is the more they increase a traditional build, the more it brings down that price gap between a traditional build. And so I think it's a really good thing. And I think those builders that really jump on, and even with natural builds, I've just done my passive house designers course this year, and the amount of layers and lines and things and to build a wall when it's just like hemp, mud, brick, it's just simple. There's so less, and it does a better job than these 15 different layers of things that if the builder makes it wrong, it still leaks air and blah, blah, blah. And so, mate, so I think, those rules and regulations, the standards that come in, it's only really going to help that natural build cost difference and help people more to take action to do that there. So.
Yeah, but at the same time, I've noticed since getting more into natural building that even those who were using more traditional methods have moved towards prefabrication just to bring down costs.
Yeah.
So even within the industry, you've got these sit-ups panels, which are insulated straw bale panels, and the hemp industry is also moving towards more prefabrication, so that you can just cut some of the costs. And when I was talking to one of the big straw bale builders in New South Wales, he was saying that of the last 9 to 10 builds he's done, they've all been prefab. So, which I think is great, but it's also a shame. Like, it is also a shame, because there's nothing wrong with straw bales. And, I've been in plenty of straw bale homes that are perfectly fine and perfectly functional. It's just considered that little bit too high a price point to be able to get that when you could get it 50 grand less, or whatever they're quoting, because it makes it cheaper and quicker. But it also gets rid of the community labor, he said. The more they do the prefab, the less they run workshops. which I think is also a problem if we're going to talk
Yeah.
about, building up the community resilience and having more educational opportunities that people can access, when the builders themselves, who have been building natural houses for 25 years, are preferring to do prefab because it means they don't have to deal with volunteer labour.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a red flag, I think.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I think it's people that I'm really fascinated about human connection, how the mind works, and like I listened to a podcast this morning, and I would spend hours every day learning and understanding this stuff. So I love it, and I think with technology, that huge big disconnection that we have, and I think people forget that it is community, and we're mammals. That human connection is really important for us, and I think the more we live in our phones and get stuck in our houses, and there's that stuff's not happening, which is creating more and more of an issue, and it gets people not wanting to do it. My kids, we talk to strangers all the time at the park. We go meet people. My son loves nothing more than going meeting kids. That's what we always do. We go meet stuff, and it's something I really want to encourage my children to. I'm that guy who will just talk to anyone.
I was going to say they definitely got that from you, Mike.
Well, my wife's completely opposite. It's interesting, and it's like living in a community. I really want to go live in a community, and Sarah's like, no, don't do it. So.
Which I think honestly is the same for me. I've seen enough of it to know how I operate and how I relate to those kind of communal living situations, and I don't think it's necessarily for me either. But I have done a lot of research onto different versions of co-living and co-housing, and I think there's definitely ways that you can find intermediary sort of models that can take some but not all. And I think there's a huge long history of that, like going from the kibbutz movement right through to the way that they've evolved and modernized. They started off being extremely socialist and extremely sharing, and everything was shared. There was no individual income, and there was no individual. You didn't own your own telly. You had communal televisions when the televisions came out, but then they've also slowly pivoted more towards more nuclear family kind of, situations that match what's happening in the rest of the world. But I think not a lot of us recognize the financial, what you were saying before about the financial benefits of sharing systems and resources. Like that to me is the really interesting part. Like that because it's about cost, and at the end of the day, it is about how many of us can access these amazing benefits. And what happens if we do start to socialize power, especially or systems like that, or even like development approval. Like, I mean, that's what kind of MOs were started as, which was like, hey, why can't 15 of families live on this giant block of land, and why can't we subdivide it and build our own houses and do it the way we want? And so I think fighting for that model. Because I can't tell you how many friends I have who would love to, a lot of us don't own our own properties, we're still renting. So how many of us would love to be able to access, security and to live in a house that we want to, if we could subdivide a block, if we could go in together and subdivide a block and build our houses as we had funds or as we financed it, and do it in that sort of more socialized way where we could have shared infrastructure, shared access to tools, you only need to get the digger over once to do all of the earth moving, and all of that stuff would make it so much more accessible if we had that framework in place.
So I was at a community on the weekend, and we were talking about that. If I got involved, like the community is probably 2001, so it's over 20-year-old community. It's pretty fresh when you look at a lot of the communities around Australia. But it's like, if I was involved from day one from the energy point of view, and I would have, I suppose the easy way I explained it to the person I was talking to on the weekend was that everyone's got 8 dirty diesel generators, so when the weather's bad, there's 8 generators running, there's 8 noise pollution, where it would have been more economical to get one. It's the same thing as well. Literally, after that conversation, like, oh, can you organize someone to come service all our generators for us, So, and it's like, I just in my head going, wow, he's going to charge that to go to these generators. And it's another thing I said, if there was one generator big enough, then they'll be more efficient. They're quieter. The big ones are actually properly silenced. It could feed everyone, and it's just that one running cost. It would, like, I reckon just even this generator maintenance to go maintain everyone's generators would have saved them $2,000, you know, just from having one generator maintained. Well, even if they're two, a big one. I remember we did a job in the Daintree, and they had like a 50 kVA generator which ran all day long, and then overnight they just flicked over to a 14 kVA generator to save fuel because it was cheaper. You didn't have to run so much. It was quieter, all that sort of stuff. So, but just, yeah, and that was actually a really cool community. Everyone lived on the back of the pub in the Daintree. So there's a whole community that lived at the back, and they shared their resources, and it was a really interesting concept. So, but yeah, they had no renewables. And the whole reason I was involved is what they were looking at is trying to put a set of community batteries in where they could save diesel and that sort of stuff. And yeah, so we're trying to design up, put a set of batteries in there to that redundancy from the generators. So, but yeah, that definitely shared resources is a big thing. Even like cars, it's a big thing for me. Like after the floods, I lost a lot of things with the floods, and I just haven't replaced. And I just have really been thinking about, I'm mad about motorbikes, and I have got myself one motorbike, which is my get around, do things. But my adventure bikes and the big rides and stuff I used to do, I'm going to hire them, you know, like for $400, I get a brand new motorbike, top of the line, fully insured, no maintenance, no drama. I get to borrow it for 2 days, drop it back, and, you know, done. So I think that those shit, and it's, you know, I'm not going to ride this, and it's a $50,000 motorbike, you know, like I wouldn't put that in my garage to ride twice a year is the reality. So I think those shared resources with cars and vehicles and trailers, and it definitely makes sense of how we can sort of restructure community and city living and to share resources.
I mean, that's sort of, you know, that's the default thinking when you live in a rural community. I live in a rural community now, and it's very much part of how you do business. But then how do you translate that into the big urban centers where, you know, we're all together, but yet we're sort of dissociated and not that connected, or we're only connected to our networks, and our networks aren't, you know, they're a bit siloed. So your network might not have the person with the trailer, you know, or the person with the, you know, that you could borrow the electric car from or whatever. So I think that is the big challenge for cities and for people living, who, you know, I've seen it work in different ways in Melbourne, from pulling down fences to, you know, getting more involved in sharing, you know, equipment and tools, and, you know, like community swaps, and, you know, there's lots of ways that people do make a dent on lowering our consumptive habits, and you know, finding ways to share resources. But I mean, I'm working in the electrification space now, and, you know, trying to talk to people who live in apartments about how they can, you know, the more apartments we build, the more problems we create, because apartments are actually really badly designed for, you know, shared solar, or, you know, shared heat pumps, or anything that's going to look at finding ways of sharing resources is actually really hard. The more vertical you get, and the more those apartments aren't being built for that. Some of them are, but not many. And, you know, from a planning perspective, I agree with density. You know, we have to live more densely. Like, that has to it has to happen. How we do that, and like how we look at how we use space when it comes to, you know, like in Europe, it's completely normal to have a shared heat pump system. Like that makes sense. You know, like, you're looking at multiple units, you're going to put in a larger heat pump, and it's going to service all the units. They have this, you know, very old traditional idea that's remained, that there's no issue with sharing those kind of service equipments, because it's efficient. It actually is more efficient.
Yeah. I think they've probably been dealing with higher costs a lot longer than what we have, is the reality. You know, we've had Australia's got terrible building because energy's been cheap. You know,
energy's cheap. Yeah, and we had the space, to be able to spread, so we spread.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it. So, so I think we have a lot of work to do. So, a lot of work.
I love your business model, though. I really do. Like, I really love what you're trying to do, and the position that you've put yourself in, especially coming from the energy perspective. but not just looking at energy. You're not just looking at solar and power. You're looking at a lot more than that. And I think you can speak to a lot more people because of that, like I think you've definitely transcended the battery guy, the battery guy identity into being something that's actually a bit more, holistic, bigger picture. Let's have conversations around how we can, be more efficient, but also how we can change some of our ideas around,
That's it. Well, I think, for me, it's just the experience I've had over the years of being the battery guy and seeing this sort of stuff and what, to make my life easier, I get people to build energy efficient homes, that the solar system performs better. I just saw that. And I think, to me, like I'm a person, I want to solve big problems and, make a huge difference in the world. And I think, I remember when I first started selling batteries, a guy said to me, this is like 2013. He said, mate, you're an idiot. You will not go anywhere and you won't survive in business only selling solar systems with batteries only off grid. And back in 2013, in the middle of the Sydney selling that sort of stuff, like, Michael Mobbs was probably the only guy that was probably your customer back then, But the minute I started doing it, and it was 2019, we sold our first system without batteries, So it was a good 6 or 7 years we were into it. But the demand was there. People were just looking for someone to be able to do it, because there wasn't no one else around. I think we're sort of that next tipping point at the moment where something really has to change with building developments and to make the world more energy efficient. Because, I was actually reading an article the other day that fusion energy, we're about 5 years away from fusion energy. And that's going to be a game changer because they think they can deliver fusion energy for 1 cent a kilowatt hour. So, from an urban environment, why would people install batteries and solar if they can buy energy for 1 cent a kilowatt hour, which is really renewable, So, and I think on that scale of things that'd be a game changer for the world, because with fusion, there's no energy required. There's no fuel sources to make it. It's just really low cost. And, hopefully that even with that low cost, we design better with houses and still do all that. Because that could cause another whole huge problem with really cheap energy again. So
yeah, that is interesting. I mean, you're not the only one that I've heard from in the last couple of years who talks about remaining grid connected, and there's a lot of reasons why the off-grid ideal or the ambition towards cutting that, which is interesting because now I'm in the decarbonisation, trying to get people off gas, which is the same kind of discussion and the same kind of argument about why it's better to just cut the connection, not just disable it, but actually remove it. And, it's quite I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but I think it's quite a definitive kind of argument that we're making by saying, do we really cut our connection to the grid, to the electricity grid, especially when we don't know what's coming down the line? I mean, I think gas is done. I think gas is, it's never going to be as cheap as it used to be, and it is very dirty and polluting, and there's a lot of reasons why we should get off gas. But it's the same argument might not be able to be made around detaching from the electricity
with the grid. Yeah, well, the way I think about the grid, it literally is a transportation service. That's all it is, And the really good thing with the gas network, we can't. Well, maybe we could get some renewable hydrogen. I don't know what we could do with that gas network, but electricity is so much easier to change the fuel source we feed it with. So, and it just comes down to resources as well. Like that resource is already there. It's already gone past the front of people's houses. Use it. We're not going and making all these batteries, all these extra solar panels if we need to. Like. My thing's always been like, if the grid's there, use it. If not, go off grid. That's a better solution rather than trying to dig trenches and run stuff in the middle of nowhere. So, it's a tough conversation. And it's funny, I get hammered on YouTube all the time. People say, but you're the off-grid guy. Why are you telling people stay to the grid? I was like, and it is literally, we went with the off-grid because so many people called us and said, hey, we want to go off-grid. And I reckon I've talked more people on staying on the grid than I've actually sold people batteries that are grid connected, Because and my thing's always when people come and say, I want to go off grid, and I'm like, what's your reason? What's your intention that you want to do it? Like, I want to save money. I'm like, well, don't do it. These days, the numbers probably stack up, but even then, it's about being that independent, self-sufficient, and doing it from an environmental point of view. Because I've found that the customers that do it from a financial point of view, they always end up unhappy. It doesn't matter what they've saved or whatever, and they might have saved a couple of $1,000s, but they're like, oh, I did all that for a couple of $1,000s. So we're the people that want to do it because they want to be self-sufficient. They want when there's a blackout, they've got lights and no one else does. They love it. They're always on the phone. You go, we had a blackout yesterday and we had power and no one else did. So it all comes down to intention of what people do it for. So
yeah. And I even noticed over the time that I was studying it that people's attitudes around what it meant to be off grid had shifted quite radically, even in those 5 years, from it being something that was seen as fairly radical, really, to something that could be absorbed into your relationship to your power and to your house in a way that was obviously quite mainstream, like you said. Like there is a lot more people looking at it from less extreme eyes, so that they can see it for all of its reasons, for the self-sufficiency, but also for the finance and also for the bigger picture. Whereas previously you were a nut job if you wanted to do that.
Yeah. No, that's it. So awesome. Well, mate, thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and mate, I could talk to you all day about this. So, so I think
we'll chat again.
Organise another time to get back on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening.
We'll put all Rachel's details in below so you can harass her and connect with her there.
Awesome.
Thanks, mate. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found the content educational and inspiring. If you got something out of it and you think you know someone else that would actually also enjoy it, we'd really appreciate if you could share the link with them and encourage them to check out our channel. And don't forget, you can join the Off Grid Tribe podcast for free, where you can actually ask and interact with myself and also our guest speakers. So jump over today to offgridtribe.com, register yourself an account where you can actually have a conversation with myself and one of our guest speakers, and we can continue the conversation there. Together, let's embrace the power of sustainable living.